All right, my AP literature friends. So I'm very excited to present this writing workshop to all of you. Finally getting around to FRQ2 from the 2022 exam. Linda Hogan's People of the Whale, that infamous octopus that got hurled at our students. And let me give you the context for this particular writing workshop because this proved to be probably not only the most interesting FRQ2 passage I've ever seen, but in terms of making writing workshops, this was got profoundly complex, interesting, ironic, twisted, you name it. So I run a Facebook group. It's called Teachers Making Better Writers. And in that group, a number of teachers reached out to me and said, Christian, how would you write this essay? Like a couple of days after the exam was released. And I said, I'll get to it. I'm in the midst of, making wedding plans. I'm getting married like next week. That's why I'm delayed in getting this video out there. And so today, at the moment of making this video, it's a Saturday in May. I think it's like the 13th or the 14th of May, 2:45 p.m. And at 9 o'clock, 8 of us from that Facebook group, Teachers Making Better Writers, hopped into Zoom and I said, guys, let's try this. I said, if you're worried and concerned about how your students wrote and performed on this particular FRQ, how about we Bob Ross our samples? We crank out a couple of introductions, crank out a couple of body paragraphs, and just work it out. And that's kind of how I teach. When I create units and prompts and content, is I'm always Bob Rossing my samples for my kids. I model for them how to manipulate my templates. And, I thought we'd be in Zoom for maybe, an hour, 90 minutes. Man, we were there for 3 hours. This task is huge. It was so hard. The we were not in agreement in terms of how to ascertain meaning, what the authorial intent was, how the author constructs meaning. We were in disagreement to some extent on how to pull apart the prompt. So this writing workshop definitely is going to be interesting. What I'm going to present to you is sort of the consensus at the end of our time together. So for those of you that are familiar with my work, I will show you how I would instruct my students to declare the thesis. So we have 4 sample introductions of well, it's actually teachers, pretending to take the exam. So you'll look at teacher writing samples, uh, manipulating the template of the declarative thesis, and then we'll break down the body paragraphs with the syllogistic method, the template my students use to, knock out their body paragraphs on the essay. So I've already alluded to this. I always ask the question, what if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? I think it's really key, really pivotal when teachers teach this particular FRQ. Try your hand at writing it. It's hard. It's really, really, really hard. I've been doing this for, over 20 years, modeling and writing exemplars with my students. I can typically crush these things out in like 25, 30 minutes. I honestly would have struggled with this had this been my exam in Mr. Kuhn's AP Lit class. One, we found there were so many things to talk about. There's like inexhaustible stuff to analyze. And I found my inner AP language teacher coming out. I was wanting to analyze this more in terms of like social commentary and linguistics and rhetoric. I saw in Hogan's first 2 paragraphs, for example, she was setting up a syllogism herself. So I wanted to analyze the logos of that narrative, and in some of the pieces that I wrote with my colleagues this morning, I did that. because I know that my students that had me in Lang and then went to Lit, they're just conditioned by virtue of being in my class to think that way. So that's kind of what they reported back to me, and I don't know if they'll be penalized for it or not. So we shall find out. So here's the prompt. The following excerpt is from Linda Hogan's novel People of the Whale, published in 2008. In this passage, the narrator describes two events that occur in a community: an infant's birth, shortly followed by an octopus's walking out of the sea. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well written essay, and this is where it gets key right here, and this is where we kind of quibbled a little bit this morning. Analyze how the author uses literary elements and techniques to develop a complex, and here it is, characterization of the community, right? So that's what students need to hone in on. We got into, you know, deconstructing the allegorical significance of the piece, which you can, by extension, talk about characterization of the community that way, of course, but if you do that exclusively, you're not necessarily meeting the demands of the assignment. So be curious to see what folks are going to get at the reading in a few weeks. So our question is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And for those of you that are familiar with my work, whenever my students do literary analysis, they declare the thesis. Or sorry, they invert the thesis. So we declare for rhetorical analysis. For literary analysis, we invert the thesis. So let's break down what that template looks like real quick. So implicit in every prompt the College Board asks for FRQ 1 for Lit, FRQ 2 for Lit, and FRQ 2 for Lang. I think implicit in those prompts are two questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? And again, for those of you that are familiar with my work, you know that my students tackle all three of those FRQs in terms of knocking out the introductory paragraph the exact same way. They always invert. So my students are going to take that first question, what is the authorial intent, and get that out of the way in the first moves of the introductory paragraph. The thesis statement is going to culminate around an answer to the question, how does the author construct meaning? And that's where you get into your terms and devices to make sure that you're really hammering home the prompt. So I'm going to go right to inverted. So in this case, you end with the thesis. Your first three sentences, you're going to answer the question, what is the authorial intent? Last sentence, how does the author construct meaning? So my students always write 4-sentence introductions for Lang and Lit for their introductory paragraphs. So that's just the nature of the template. And what they do is fill it in with some context and background. One thing that I look for is tier 2 level vocabulary. And by that, I just mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words. So keep it academic in nature without sounding pretentious, contrived, like a goon. You keep it in your wheelhouse, but it is an academic task. I have a ton of stuff in my YouTube channel with regards to how I get my students to augment their vocabulary over the course of the academic year. So I do intense word study with them. And then sentence constructs. You'll see my students hopefully at the time of the exam be able to manipulate their syntax in order to achieve some kind of complexity with regards to their voice, their rhythm, and their flow. So I espouse kind of a rule or a hack, a cheat code that comes from Strunk and White. They wrote a textbook called Write It Right. And in it, they have something known as rule number 18. And they assert that there are 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. And I skill and drill my kids on that all year long so that they, know how to wield sentences for effect, for purpose. And the cool thing is, a lot of these kids I have in my creative writing class as well. So that we've been writing together for a very long time. So End with the thesis, context, background, tier 2 sentence constructs. It's going to be exactly 4 sentences long. So mind you, these introductions are not my students. They are teachers from my Facebook group, Teachers Making Better Writers. So this is teacher number 1 manipulating my template. First 3 sentences, what is the authorial intent? Fourth sentence, how does the author construct meaning? We're going to drop our terms and devices there. So look what we have going on here. It is human tendency for the mind to impose causal order to that which cannot be explained. And that's kind of like the big ha-ha moment, right? So we tell, I tell my students, go for the cutthroat in that opening line. The exigence, the gist, the oomph. Why did Hogan write this? So here it is. It is human tendency for the mind to impose causal order to that which cannot be explained. Given this, as can be seen historically in origin stories, mankind describes value and meaning to that which is inexplicable, whether it be explaining the essence of life, the cause of the universe, or even the how and the why of octopus behavior. Man can invent some far-fetched stories. Linda Hogan allegorically comments upon this phenomenon through her representation of the community and its collective interpretation of their cave-dwelling resident. So there in the end, you work in what, I advise, the teachers I work with and my students focus on the most salient element, device, terms of the piece. And this teacher is going the route of the allegory, right? That the whole thing is an allegory. So, so 3 sentence, what is the authorial intent? 4th sentence, how does the author construct meaning? You can see the vocab is up there. Sentence constructs are advanced. Pretty decent voice rhythm and flow. Exactly 4 sentences long. Here's teacher number 2. Ever since the advent of time, man has sought to give voice to the ineffable qualities of nature. You see, each time, go for the ha-ha, the gusto, the light bulb, the eureka. Man is a meaning maker, and when meaning cannot be made, he creates stories and ascribes value to things that are actually meaningless and rather innocuous. This is why history is dotted with false gods and false prophets. Linda Hogan touches upon this fact through her allegorical rendering of the octopus and her characterization of human reasoning. So again, focus on the terms and devices in that last sentence, which comprises the thesis statement. The 3 sentences above it are the context, the background that get to the authorial intent. Focus on that vocab. Focus on those sentence constructs. Here's teacher number 3 doing another inverted thesis. Life, sadly, is meaningless. Ever since we pulled ourselves upright and began to do this thing called living, mankind has sought to make sense of his world and its origins. As such, over this great expanse of time, there have been countless gods, deities, and prophets, all of whom are meaningless. Logan Hogan gives voice to this through her allegorical depiction of the octopus and through the characterization of the community that interact with it. It should say Linda Hogan, not Logan Hogan. I don't know why I did that. But the template, again, is adhered to. It's manipulated, and we're pulling the strings of that. What is the authorial intent? How does the author construct meaning? 3 plus 1, right? Sentence constructs. Focus on the tier 2. Focus on the sentence constructs. Every single time done the exact same way. And here's teacher number 4 from the Facebook group. Man's most preeminent fear is that life is for naught. For centuries, great philosophical minds have wrangled with the big questions as to why we are here and who made us and what does it all add up to. Thousands of years later, we still do not have any definitive answers, yet we persist in trying to make sense of our world. Linda Hogan unpacks this human condition through her allegorical depiction of the octopus and the community's collective rationalizing of its behavior and existence. Every time, 4 sentences, last sentence, drop those terms and devices, right? So The teachers that were willing to allow me to use their work were in accord with me, and um, you know, also have some laying experience and are getting into the logos, the reasoning, the rationalizing of the community, that collective groupthink that they have, which was an interesting dynamic. So moving on to the body paragraphs, I advise my students to do 4 paragraphs for all of the College Board essays: intro, 2 bodies, conclusion. So that's what I would advise them to do on this. And just for time's sake, simplicity's sake, I'm going to show you one example of how they would bust out a syllogism and a syllogistic body paragraph. So, when your students ask, how do I write the body paragraph? My kids were always going syllogistically. So this is a template I've developed over my 20-year career. It can be used uniformly across the expository modes, not just lit analysis. My guys use it for rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research, you name it. So it's pretty universal. So the syllogistic method, for those of you that are new to this, I'll give you a quick synopsis, and in my YouTube channel, you can take deeper dives into this if you're inclined. I unpack it at greater lengths in other videos. But the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, so it comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, basically. And they would have these great philosophical conversations, and you may have encountered some of them in your studies, and you may even teach them with your laying students. Plato's Republic postulates the question, what is justice? And all these great philosophical think takers step to the mic and they drop their definition of what is justice. Each definition is a syllogistic construct. We as composition teachers are principally concerned with how our students establish and sustain their line of reasoning, and Aristotle was the same way, right? So he said the really good orators were disciplined in their line of reasoning and actually argued syllogistically, and what he meant by that was that they went from premise, conclusion, very mathematical. They were very cogent. So we could say, premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. When our students argue in literary analysis, or even any of the other expository modes, we want them to be that lockstep and that deliberate and locked in and cogent. And it's really tricky to teach that. So in terms of executing this essay, here's how you define the terms of the premises. So the first premise is going to be an argument anchored in terms and or devices. And the first premise is a 3-sentence move. It's always 3 sentences. So if you're familiar with my work, you know that. Every single time, students take 3 sentences to set that up, and we'll model that for you in a second. Premise 2 is textual support. And that's your teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing. You don't want to do one so much more at the expense of the other. And then the conclusion, and I want to be careful in articulating this, the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay, is the echo, the link, and the promise. So the first premise is a promise. I promise you, dear reader, that I'm going to follow this line of reasoning, and all my quotes and paraphrases are going to be germane to this promise. And in the end, I'm going to shake hands with you and echo that thesis. All right, so that's what happens in a syllogistic body paragraph. So students often ask, Kuhn, we're using templates. How many sentences is a syllogistic body paragraph? And I contend that those little itty bitty 4, 5, 6 sentence body paragraphs that our students write just don't have enough support and analysis to really advance the argument and flesh it out enough. So I tell my guys to shoot for 10 sentences, hard cap at 12. I think if they go above 12, it's going to get plot heavy, bloviate, bird walk, and most likely break the line of reasoning. So, and just get too convoluted. So 10 is kind of my magic number. So this syllogism right here is from a teacher in my Facebook group. She wants to go over the exam with her students on Monday, and I helped her with this a little bit, and this is what we're modeling for our kids. So students often ask, where do I begin? Where do I begin my body paragraph? And my advice is always start with or always start where the author starts. Like, establish your chronology, establish your sequencing, right? So if you're orderly, it's easier to sustain that line of reasoning, so you're not crisscrossing your analysis all over the place. So start where the author starts. So you'll see students transition like this, right from the onset. All right. So you got to drop your terms in here, and you're going to take 3 sentences so that you keep the argument central. Right from the onset, Hogan creates a causal relationship between the birth of the infant and the inexplicable behavior of the octopus. In many ways, because of the manner in which the pronouns and conjunctions are manipulated, the passage unfolds like a syllogistic argument progressing from if statements to then claims. The short, simple declarative sentences also highlight this quality. So one thing that I do when I grade papers is this, and when I workshop with students is, if I am to put your first premise into a promise, what would I say? And here's what we're promising. A conversation about the causal relationship, a conversation about the syntax, and then kind of the logos. Even though, that we're doing a lit exam, the community has a certain logos to their thinking, and Hogan reflects that in her writing. So all the quotes, all the paraphrases need to be linked to that promise. Otherwise, we're going to have a break in the line of reasoning. So in the 4th sentence, we begin the second premise, and I tell my students, just get right into the text. So go quote grabbing, right? Go grab some quotes, paraphrase it, analyze it, and just 1, 2, 3 punch. Quote, paraphrase, analyze until you have all the support you need to fully substantiate your argument. So within the first 2 paragraphs, Hogan references it on several occasions and qualifies the meaning being ascribed to the octopus by the community with as if statements. For example, the reader is told that every one of these ocean people stood back, amazed to see it walk, the eye of it looking at them, each one seen as if each one were known in all their past, all their future. So perfect quote, right? So we want our students, model for our students how to quote with deliberation. So you quote, you got to analyze it. The it is the divine significance of the octopus, as well as the human tendency to deify nature when nature's chaos renders things ineffable. So we go on. In this regard, the it is analogous to what humans have done for centuries in terms of divining their known through the likes of gods, prophets, and deities. The fact of the matter is that man does not know his origin, so he indulges in as if thinking because he's afraid of its potent meaning. And I like what we were doing with this, like teaching the kids to just grab from the text. Grab from the text, get your quote, substantiate everything, use the language of the passage to substantiate everything you're saying. So it's pretty neat. Given that much of life is inexplicable to the human mind, Hogan notes that mankind arbitrarily conflates cause and effect and does things like think it was a holy creature and its presence at the time of his birth granted to Thomas a special life. Further, mankind becomes convinced of these concocted associations. So we got plenty of support going on, and it's all tied back to that first premise. So everything's aligned. In the end here, you got to go echo that thesis. You got to bring it back to the prompt. So let's see what happens here. As existential as it may sound, The causal relationships in the passage and the syntactical arrangements make one thing clear. Most of the meaning humans ascribe to higher powers is meaningless and arbitrary. As Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? So sometimes an octopus is just an octopus in a cave, right? And that's kind of what Hogan is getting at. So that's just one example, and then one question we often get is, where do the students go from there? Oh my goodness, there's so many more things to discuss in this passage to get at least one more body paragraph out of. So there's still many more terms and devices that need to be analyzed and interpreted to unpack the fullness of the prompt. So anyways, that about does it. So I have a few irons in the fire that I'll let you know of. So as many of you know, this coming fall, I'll be presenting at NCTE with Tim Freitas and Brandon Abden. We'll be presenting together. I'm doing some professional development with the National Writing Project starting shortly, so we'll keep you appraised to that. Doing monthly webinars with Perfection Learning, and then cobbling together my textbook, centering around my essential question: what if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? And with that, I'm teaching a mastermind where I'm coaching teachers, my methods, my modalities, everything from my alternative grading methods, my Plato discussion modality, the templates, my Nuance Academy, Word Study Academy, the whole kit and caboodle. So if you want the slides for this particular presentation, you can feel free to email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. For more information about all of the comings and goings that we just talked about, I have a webpage, teachinghowtowrite.com, and you can scope that out. So for now, be well, be happy, happy teaching, happy writing.